Huh? No.
The guy afterwards was like, hey, you guys, I like this, come back and do the hardest stuff we have. It's got like a couple of episodes.
Okay, good evening. Good to see everybody. And we'll get into our 7th lesson here. And there's one more lesson after this one. And then after next week, if things move along, John will be going with us from 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, or just?
Yes, all three of them.
Yeah, so you might want to go ahead and read those, and it's going to be a great study. Turn your Bibles, please, to Proverbs 5. Just as we get started here, we'll read that just for the fellows here. Again, as we've looked at this, I've tried to look at just what the Bible has to say about marriage, and we haven't covered everything, certainly. And I've tried to leave out the philosophy in the world, not that there's anything wrong with that, but God has given some pretty good instruction on marriage also. And as I said earlier, it might be good sometime to study the book of Solomon in here on Wednesday evening or Sunday. Just there's some other interesting things to talk about. Guys, the reason I want us to look at Proverbs tonight, chapter 5, verse 18 and 19, is because tonight's lesson is basically for our sisters, but for you also. And sometimes we get the wrong ideas from such lessons, but we want to talk about them. Want our sisters to help us along the line here to understand what they understand about the passage in Ephesians chapter 5. We'll look at it in just a second. First of all, guys, let's read this together, everybody. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. As a loving hind and a gracious doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. Okay, guys. What are you supposed to do? I'll read it again. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. As a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. All right, guys. What are you supposed to do?
Rejoice in the wife of your youth.
What does that mean?
Be pleased, be glad.
Yeah. Now, some of us may have, like, Janie's not the wife of my youth. Sue was the wife of my youth, okay? And so I look at these in different ways now and everything, but you're supposed to be you're supposed to rejoice in her, you're supposed to be glad, and she's supposed to do what? You're supposed to look at her for your satisfaction. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. Now, it didn't take a book that thick to understand that, did it? Rejoice in the wife of your youth. And ask some of the older fellows here how they do that and how they believe that's demonstrated in their life. Anybody got anything they want to say about this passage? Since there's something else you're supposed to do also. A couple of things, but let me see. Oh, and be exhilarated always with her what? Huh? Love. Be exhilarated with it. You know, we're always looking for things to lift us up and to encourage us and to motivate us. You get the idea from the Bible that your wife's love for you should do that. You should be exhilarated in that. You should thrive in her love for you, because you're supposed to rejoice in her. And along with that comes a lot of responsibility. In lessons 5 and 6, we dealt with the husband's duties physically and spiritually, and there might have been some other verses you could have looked at and so forth, but again, we have limited time here on this. And what we're going to do today is focus, if you want to turn over to Ephesians chapter 5 and be ready, we're going to focus together on the role of submission in marriage. And I think it's important for us to understand, I didn't say just the wife's submission, but there's a role of submission in the marriage between a couple and so forth, as there are between brothers and sisters. So we'll briefly look at that. And again, the submission specifically tonight as it applies to wives. And I would ask you ladies maybe to help us with the discussion on that and so forth, and let us know how you understand that passage. It's also understood when you generally talk about this, you talk about husband and wife relationships, biblical husband and wife relationships, that it's not always an easy topic. Many people will say, or I've had said to me, well, that doesn't apply to today. Today, things are different. God's word is the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? It's without change. It doesn't change. So whatever applied to the Old Testament and New Testament saints applies today. And so it might be some things to help us out here. Now, I should have had you go to John 13. Let's go over there first and just look at Jesus' example here of submission. And you're all familiar with it, and we're going to read it even though you are familiar with it, just to set it in our minds. Who will go to Matthew 20, 25 through 28? Be ready to read that for me, please. Raise your hand quickly. Matthew 20, 25 to 28. Okay. All right, here we go. Now, before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid aside his garments, taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet and to wipe of the disciples and wiped them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter and he said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I do to you, you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Now, and we could go on and read that. We're not going to study this particular passage in depth or anything, but just an idea here of what Jesus is doing. He's washing his disciples' feet, I know. But is he not being submissive to their needs? Candy, what? He is, isn't he? He is being submissive to their needs. Did that take away his leadership role at all?
No, he was still their master, but he was trying to show them that a master is also a servant.
Right. So it took no authority away from him whatsoever, did it? And it's like we were taught years ago, many of us, that if you want to be a good leader, you never ask anybody to do what you wouldn't do or haven't done already. And so I think he's showing submissiveness as a sign of leadership. I'm not talking about cowardly submissiveness. I'm talking about this was a willingness. He had a willingness, of course, I know, to teach them something, but also for them to see something about what a leader is. Anybody have any comments on this passage? Probably gonna, yes, Ken.
I was just thinking, sometimes you look at relationships as something you have to do, this and that. When in reality, you see somebody in need, and you have a joyous spirit, and you want to help that person. Husband and wife, you love her body, soul, and mind. And then she loves you in return. You got a beautiful relationship there, and the same thing with our brothers and sisters. We just learn to be like you said in Christ and serve one another.
We used to talk about a servant's heart all the time. Remember, it takes a servant's heart. Who's Matthew 20, 25 to 28, please?
But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
Okay, so if you want to be a servant, if you want to be a leader like Jesus was, you have to also be a servant like he was. Makes sense, doesn't it? And so in any type of a leadership role or any type of role at all, we as Christians are to be, according to Ephesians 5:21, submissive to one another. We are supposed to be willing to serve one another. And I like the way Paul puts verse 21 there before he goes into the rest of the chapter. Now switch on over to Ephesians 5, and let me get okay, here we go. I'd like to just take time to read verses 22 through 33, and we will also be using this passage next week. And if we don't finish all of this, we will go a third week, but that should end it. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord, and I'm reading from the New American Standard. For the husband is the head of the wife, so Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. Now, most of the instruction in this passage is given not to the wives, but to the husband. It's used as an example here, and we need to take a close look at it. But just for our sisters here, we've looked at verse 21 and the admonition of Paul for all of us to be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. And that's something that we must have in our lives, and that's not always easy. What is the problem that we experience sometimes when we look at this verse and we realize, Andy, that we must be subject one to another? We must be submissive one to another. Guys, well, what, and I was just picking on your name to pick on it. What kind of problems might that have for the individual? What does being subjective to somebody involve? Gene?
Well, a lack of self.
Okay, a lack of self, all right. John?
I think sometimes we want to equate this type of submission to a civil authority or something like that. And people who occupy positions of authority in civil realms or corporate realms and things like that aren't always the most gentle about using that authority, and certainly not using it for the benefit of those who are under that authority.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Gary?
I think people in general are selfish, and putting someone's needs before your own is easier said than done. And to do it consistently and without thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part about all this. I feel like there should be a flow chart with this. You know, the husband submissive to the wife, in turn, the wife submissive to the husband. She's looking out for him, he's looking out for them, for her, but they're one.
Yeah. And a little bit more responsibility there in your flow chart for the husband, which we'll discuss next week. But I'm just, you know what I mean, you're right. Let's listen to Matthew 20. I'm over at Matthew 22, verses 36 through 39. Matthew 22. What did I do with that? There it is. Nope, that's car keys. Oh, here it is. Sorry about that. All right. Listen to this one closely. 36 through 39, excuse me. Matthew 22, 26 through 39. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, does submission require love in your life? So if you're to love your neighbor, and there's a sense in which we submit to our neighbor's needs if they have needs, correct? How much of a deeper love should your love go for your spouse? And in that relationship, as a woman respects her husband, which we'll look at here, and thinks about the things that God has for her to do, does it make her easier to submit to a man who she knows loves him like he loves himself? Or loves her like he loves himself? The Bible says, you know, you shall love your Lord your God with all your heart. Verse 39, the second is like this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Marriages break up because somebody doesn't love themselves enough to do what's right for themselves. I know there's all sorts of reasons, but a problem comes right down to the very fact that you forget loving yourself enough to do what's right for yourself in eternity, correct? Would that be a fair statement? Should you not love yourself enough to want to do what's right for yourself in eternity? Now, if you have that kind of a love for your spouse, what is your concern for her? That she does what? Oh, come on, guys.
Goes to heaven.
She goes to heaven. I mean, you as husband and wives do talk about this stuff, right? You talk about talking with one another, how can we help each other go to heaven? Do you love your spouse as well as you love yourself? If you come to me and say, some days, some guys do, I just don't love my old lady anymore. You've heard that said? Some of us guys have heard that at work. The problem is he stopped loving who? Himself. Because God says you're supposed to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And your wife certainly ought to be the closest neighbor you have, right? And so you don't want to stop. You know, if you stop loving your wife, then you stop loving yourself enough to want to live right with God. And God's given you this woman of your youth, the apple of your eye, and you're supposed to love her. We'll talk about that next week. But why that's so important is God says she needs to be submissive to you. And we can get a lot of discussion what the submissiveness means. We'll just talk about what the Bible talks about here. And if you don't agree with the Bible, then that problem's between you and God, not me and you, okay? So we'll just look at a few things. But I think it's something that we need to be aware of and we need to think about. Wives in verse 22, it's an imperative in the Greek language. Wives need to submit to your husbands as to the Lord in verse 22 of Ephesians 5. Submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Okay, ladies, what does it mean? especially some of you older ladies that have been doing this for years and years and years and years. I'm not that final one yet. What does that mean? Listen, what's so important about this, and I know you may not want to answer because you may not want to be wrong, and nobody's wrong in what we're saying here or there. But if we can't talk about this among ourselves, do we talk with our children and our grandchildren about these things? Do our sisters tell their granddaughters what it means to be submissive to their husband as to the Lord? What does that mean? How do you ladies practice that?
You put their interest above your own.
I didn't hear you, please.
You put their interest and just putting them ahead of you.
How do you do that?
It's pretty easy most of the time. Just kind of taking care of them and doing small things here and there that make them feel better or that they don't have to do because you've taken care of it.
Can I ask you this question?
Sure.
Does being submissive to your husband have anything to do with the authority that God has given him in the home?
Yes.
So if that's true, then Candy, what does that mean? What kind of authority does your husband have? She was shaking her head, Ken. She's more brilliant than you are, that's why I'm asking her, okay? So when you submit to your husband's authority in the home, what does that mean? Anybody?
I think part of it is you always show him respect.
Well, that's obedience to verse 33, isn't it?
Not that he makes every decision, but I think you make decisions together. However, if there's maybe two different opinions, you know, it is our job if our husband, as being the Christian husband that he should be, then it's easy to say, okay, then that's the decision we make based on, you know, the family needs. And you know, if the husband is being a Christian husband, it is not hard to be submissive, because he is doing what's in your best interest, you're doing what's in his best interest.
And
So
here's
it
the way
works.
I feel about what you just said, that if Janie and I are discussing something, and I happen to think, well, I don't know, but okay, we'll go your way. If it doesn't work out, guess who I don't blame? I don't blame her. Because I made the decision to do what? I take the blame. You understand what I mean? I take that weight, if you want to call it that, because my wife is submissive to me in the home. Now, I chose to go her way, but I can't come and say, I told you, Janie, that wouldn't work. I do that once in a while. I shouldn't, but anyhow, you know, Andy.
Yeah, I agree that it makes it easy when everybody is serving God, but it doesn't give us that out. We are to love our wives, regardless of whether they're loving. Wives are to submit to their husband regardless of whether their husbands are loving them. It's a command.
Absolutely correct. And if our wives have a problem with that, their problem is not with us, it's with who? With God. And I was going to bring that. I have a little plan, more dynamic thing on that, but you kind of got off. That's okay. So you're right.
I mean, it works better when everybody's working for the same goal,
Yeah.
but sometimes we're not going to be there.
Oh,
Both of us are not going to be on the same page all the time, but that doesn't mean that, well, now I don't have to love you, or now I don't have to.
or that you don't have to bear responsibility as a leader, correct? So, if I just add to that. And we're not going to get very far tonight, I'm sorry. It's always been to me, this has always been a hard thing to teach, because you don't want to sound like you don't respect the woman who submits to you and understand the influence that she has in the home and the real power that she has in the home. You understand what I mean? But I think it's the way God has set up things, and it comes back to this, that somebody needs to bear responsibility. So I've just decided, if I've decided that Janie's way is right and it doesn't work out, okay. You know what I mean? It's my responsibility, because in the end, I did what? I made the decision, even though it was, the final decision. So that's how I look at it. Anybody else? We've got about 1 minute, and I'm sorry we didn't get any further. So I've got in your notes, if you've got the notes, I've got, let me put this up on the thing here, see where we're at. Okay, the imperative, verse 22. Okay. What is God's intent? In Ephesians 5:24, submit your husbands in everything. I think that has to do with social things, spiritual things, economic things, every area of life. He doesn't break it down and say just in one thing, right? But in order to submit to a leader in a home, a man has to be willing to do what? Lead. Be a loving, caring father in the home. And we'll discuss that hopefully next week, or probably another 2 weeks, John, or not. So, but we have to be willing to do that, and I know it's an uncomfortable thing. So, anybody want to make any comments before we close out? I think the second bell's rung, or it should have. I don't know. It's a quarter till. Anybody have anything to say? What do they want to say? Gene. Go ahead.
My thought is, if you don't have this dynamic, then you started out with, as a husband, I should rejoice in my wife.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not taking that responsibility, then I'm taking joy. I'm laying that onto her, which takes that joy away from that relationship. So I think God's plan was, hey, you're right. I'm the guy that's responsible for leading this family and what happens. Good or bad, I'm exhilarated that she still loves me, because there's been a lot of bad decisions.
We talk about that on Monday nights when you're on your cruise. So, anyhow, thank you for your attention tonight. And we only had about 20, 25 minutes when we got started here. So we'll kind of finish this off and go into really the bigger question in our study, and that'll be how husbands are to really love their wives. And that's what I think is very, very important. Thanks a lot, guys.